This is my shit.
That's really a vibe. That's really a vibe.
Like it's every episode. I don't never get tired of that, bro. And it's crazy because like we made that bump in a day. So I was in Chicago, like either last year or year before last. Yeah. And I told my cousin, I was like, "Yo, I gotta put a theme song together for the podcast." So there's a producer on TikTok. His name is Mark Billier, and he's the white dude that be standing in front of the recorder. He just be saying wild shit in the microphone over the beat. Yeah, that's his voice.
Oh, snap.
Yeah,
that's fire. No, that's tough, bro.
Yeah, slowed it down, added some vocals, and then put a beat behind it. I was like, yo, so I feel like it's dope. But
I'm here for it.
Good people, great people, God's people. Thank you for joining me for another episode of The Antidote. I am your host, Professor Odie, also known as Odi Lakachi William Hezekiah Onkwe. Very rarely do I say my whole name on here because it just, when people meet me in real life, that's when I say my whole name. But on the platforms, I am Professor Odie. Here I have with me a phenomenal brother, a foundational brother, a amazing brother, right? And my running joke is that my guests can introduce themselves better than I can, usually introduce them because I'm not a great introducer. Like I'll say all of these fantastic and amazing things about you, but I won't tell people actually what you do and who you are. So, Brother Marquise, please let the people know who you are, what you do, things that you do, and all of those other things.
Ain't nothing but a word. Like you said, my name is Marquise Davon, Marquise Richards, wherever you want to go with it. Keith, just don't be calling me Mark. I don't do that at all. I'm the host of the Keepin It a Bean podcast. So that's where we bring together culture commentary all over a cup of coffee or tea, depending on when I'm recording. Also the co-host of the Heavy's the Crown podcast, which is a Bel Air recap podcast. Really, really dope time working with Skip from BK. Really, really dope creative as well. Other than that, educator, activist, talking some shit on some regular. Like, so that's me. It's good to be here, my guy.
I appreciate you. And I appreciate your time, brother. I appreciate your time. So, educator, activist, Black man, creative. There's it's a multi-hyphenate going on here.
There's a couple, multi-hyphenate,
You feel me? But I think that's the millennial. I think that's the millennial calling card. It's like we don't ever fit into one category. That's one, but also the way in which we navigate the categories that we are in are usually adjacent to one another. So I want to talk to you a little bit about being a Black educator, right? Being a Black male educator and the impact or the intent, or I would say your intent and the impact that it has as a person who is, I'm assuming, in the Philadelphia school system. So I want to talk a little bit more about that. Like, what have your experiences been? What have you learned? How have you navigated? Like, let's crack open the can.
Yeah, it was a lot of learning for me, right? Going into a space where I didn't have Black male educators really growing up. My first official teacher, or not even teacher, but professor I had was a Black woman. Shout out to Dr. April Williams. She was my sociology professor, senior year of college, second semester. So quite literally the very last semester I was there, I finally experienced what it was like to have a Black educator. I tell everybody, I was not trying to education. No, not for me at all. I went to school for broadcast journalism and I went to school for theater. So I was like, I'm never going to be working with no kids. But I fell into education accidentally. I realized it's a lot of my heart work. It's a lot of my purpose. It's a thing that I'm happy to get paid to do, but I wouldn't mind doing it for free. But I think some of the biggest lessons I've learned in education, especially a Black male educator, and we make up less than 2% of the nation's educator force. It's consistency, it's representation. It is being a possibility model for so many of these young boys because they see us oftentimes as a mentor or a disciplinary, but they don't see us as somebody who is someone who is capable of teaching, somebody who is capable of doing instruction, somebody who is capable of being nurturing in the way that they need to. So for me, I think that was like a super important lesson was how do I continue to bring my full self into this space, but how do I serve as a possibility model of what a Black man can be in education, especially because I'm teaching literature. So I got to be either a window or a mirror to plenty of these students in terms of who they can see themselves reflected in, but also the possibility of looking out the window and seeing who they can be as well. And I thought literature was the perfect place to do it, but then also being an SEL content lead, I got to also develop curriculum around Black masculinity, SEL, but also life skills and feminist thought. And so being able to bring all that together, where I worked at an all boys high school. So like that definitely like brought it full circle for me, and just realizing the need for boys to get permission to simply be. And I think that's what I realized. Me being able to give other Black boys permission to be emotional, be curious, be proud of themselves, be scared, be vulnerable. Like that's the piece that I think in my journey of being a Black educator and being into this space, it's that giving permission as they bear witness to what could be or who they could be.
It's a very powerful answer, brother. That was a very educator-esque.
Right.
And I was like, damn, this brother gonna convince me to go into education on the Lord's keys. But no, so I wanna ask a clarifying question, right?
Yeah.
Because in what you were saying, it seemed as if though you made a differentiating factor between a mentor and an educator, right? Yes. So in your mind or in your expertise, what is the difference between a mentor and an educator? Because for me, I believe that mentors have an element of education to them, and educators can be mentors in a particular way. But I want to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I actually think the only real difference is the capability to have the science of teaching. Everybody assumes like teaching is getting in front of these kids and you're able to just say whatever you need. I think there's space, and I always go by the Malcolm X idea is what is a homemade education, which I think mentors can exist in and be able to encourage in different ways versus like a trained educator where I'm just like, nah, like I'm taking laps. There's intentional laps. There's making sure I'm collecting data. Are my students successful in learning the skill of critical thinking, of problem solving, of analysis work? That's the difference of an educator versus a mentor. A mentor can still be there for the social emotional learning component of things, for this holding space, for life lessons and stuff like that. An educator adds on the science of teaching to what mentorship can look like.
Most definitely. And another part of your answer that I thought was very interesting was giving Black boys permission to just be.
Yeah.
And giving them the permission to be curious, to be, emotional, to have these spaces where they can express the entirety or the breadth of their humanity. So walk me through that. What is your process in teaching a Black boy how to be? What does that look like?
Yeah, man, that's me showing up and inviting them into my world, right? So for me, it all starts from how am I designing my classroom? And that's something I always love that space because I'm like, oh, there's a science to this. Do I want my space to look like? And for me, I always try to envision like what space am I most comfortable sharing ideas in? And it's always been like a cafe, a coffee shop, sitting there and discussing ideas. I'm like, we're talking about literature. Okay, I'm getting these kids to read. Okay, I loved watching this happen. And so for me, I wanted to create a space that felt curious. So what I had in my room had to appeal to the five senses. Was there space for students to be able to move around? Did I keep an open space where everybody felt like ideas could be shared? If I'm doing a Socratic seminar, I'm creating like an open circle, but I like the space where students can dialogue with one another. And so that means I'm putting them in clusters. So 2 seats facing each other. So all of these boys can discuss ideas, can disagree, can engage, all of that stuff, right? So the science of the classroom in itself is really dope. And then for me personally, how I add into it is like, I have my music playing. It's neo soul in the morning. They know my coffee routine. They know I'm having greenery in the room. So this way they're walking into a space that feels calming. They're walking into a space that is like, oh, I'm walking to a space that feels like an extension of Mr. Marquise or Mr. Richards. And then as they are able to also build in this space, I'm like, I'm not the only one inhabiting this space most of this day. I got my boys who are coming in too. And so trying to also envelop the space of like, what are our 10 commandments of the classroom, right? I always told my kids, closed mouths do not get fed. There's also, I don't want you to be perfect. I simply want you to try. And so
Mhm.
also for that space, that invites them in to not have to have the right answer all the time. And kids struggle with that. But the other space of allowing them to be is not only inviting them into the world that I created, it's now allowing them to craft what that safe space can look like. So I had students coming into my room who were not even supposed to be in my room, were like, I just want to learn in Mr. Richards' room. It's not like they were trying to skip class. They wanted to, their excuse was, I want to learn with Mr. Richards. That's a very different thing to say, I'm just skipping because I just want to chill with Mr. Richards. I now have some students who did that, right? But as I understood they were comfortable learning in my classroom, the other piece was me being as authentically as I could be, right? And in that authenticity, they were not used to somebody like me. And so for me, it's like, oh, you asking us what made us smile today? You're asking us about our feelings. Oh, now you have now they're like, well, I know you love Coco Jones, so like what happened with this, right? And so it's just like little things like that allow them to be, because they see me love the things I do. They knew I was a content creator outside of work. And so they also have the respect for that piece as well. And so when I look at all these things that give them permission, I'm showing them what it means to be a fan of somebody. I'm showing them what it means to really know the things that I need in order to show up. They knew, like, oh, Mr. Richards, don't talk to Mr. Richards if he ain't have his coffee yet. Don't mess up Mr. Richards' desk because you know he likes stuff in a very particular way. And so I think as they got to see all these different sides of me, it gave them permission to also be. But I also get to be curious with my students. So say I had to redirect somebody. Well, did I do something that bothered you? How do you need to calm down? Do you need to take a walk? Did you eat today? Right? Asking them questions and being curious about their lives also allows them to build the emotional vocabulary, allows them to build the self-awareness and learn, how do I articulate this thing to my teacher? Right? Mm-hmm. And that, as they were able to do that, they felt freer. They felt like they can live in the audacity a little bit more. They felt like they could ask questions. They felt like they could mess up. They felt like that I would support them on the other end. And so though they might not always have the answers, me as the adult in the room, I'm simply there as a guide. I'm a facilitator. I'm not anything more and not anything less. Test scores matter, but your holistic things matter too. And so you weren't just a student to me. You were a young boy who was learning about the world. And I had to be curious about the world that you're going to grow up in so I can guide you as much as possible.
Okay. Most definitely. And I think that in that space, so as a young Black man, right, mm-hmm. I did not have my first Black male teacher until I hit high school, right? Wow. And it was very interesting because I had always had like aides or like, you know, or like subject teachers, like my art teacher. My art teacher was a short Black dude. He was we always thought he was a couple of marbles short of a whole game because my man did amateur backyard wrestling on the weekends, and we was just like, you know, whatever floats your boat. Yeah, like. But now as adults, I'm like, oh, these people actually are real people, and they don't just exist within the confines of this classroom, right? But my very first one of my very first impactful Black male school-based figures, his name was Mr. Andre Dawkins, and on the lowest of keys, that's the reason why I got locked. You dig what I'm saying? Yeah. Mr. Dawkins was a cool bull, right? I always thought that he was a very, you know, put together, well-rounded brother, but I never understood why he wasn't a teacher. Yeah. Right. I never understood why he was not in the classroom. And getting into high school, where once again, I had Eugene Lockhart and I had Dr. William McHenry. Right at the time, he wasn't a doctor. Now you're a doctor, you can't tell him shit. But
I'm a doctor. You gonna call my name? I love niggas with some degrees.
You can't tell McHenry nothing, right? But once again, McHenry, man, me and McHenry used to have like a time. I used to give McHenry hell, bro. Like this man humbled me. Humbled, you know how Black folk humbled. He humbled me. Right? Come on. My man, he made me rewrite a essay. And I'm like, bro, where I come from in my, you know what I'm saying, my middle school bouts, I'm not rewriting no essays. I used to go to
you know who I am?
You know exactly. Do you know who I am? Mr. Henry, look, boy, you are. What about this work? right? What about this what you are presenting?
Yeah.
How are you presenting yourself through the written word? How are you presenting yourself through critical thinking, right? McHenry, it was his favorite, like it was his catchphrase. What does that mean?
Oh, I love that.
What does that mean? Right? What does that mean? And imagine that, right? But he would say imagine that when people would be doing foolishness. And imagine that. Imagine that. Right? Straight out. You feel what I'm saying? But it literally like 10 years later, 11 years later, I put up, because we friends on Facebook now, as are all the rest of the teachers when we get older. I put up a post on Facebook. I said, everybody from these classes, including myself, owe McHenry an apology. Because now that I'm looking in the vast landscape of the emotional and cognitive spaces that I inhabit, I can comfortably and firmly say that Mr. McHenry saved us from the onslaught of the stupid that we did not know was coming. Mr. McHenry, I apologize.
And this is what we say, teaching is the most thankless damn job you ever gonna have in your life. 11 years later, you understand.
Because boy, I didn't see it, right? And I think that's important as it relates to the essence of teaching, because I know that in the educational sector right now, there are a lot of people quitting. There are a lot of people leaving. There are a lot of people moving out of the sector because they feel as if though there's not enough support, right? Has there been an impact on the students in your perspective?
Absolutely. I'm a product. I'm one of them, right? I left the classroom last year because I was burnt out, right? And that was tough. And I didn't realize I was grieving leaving the classroom, because these are kids I thought I was going to be committed to staying with up until they graduated. I wanted to have my 4 years in one school to just know like I went through and impacted this set of students, right? So that's tough because it does impact the students, because now they have to grieve a teacher that they were so used to seeing every single day. And I didn't take days off until the end of the year. And I'm big on just like consistency, at least for my first couple of months, because my students need to see me and they need to get used to me, right? Now that's just for me personally, but it is tough because so many students develop their habits. I had 22 students a morning, sometimes 23, come up and they had to start hugging me before they start their day, right? I was a safe space for so many people in that school. I was a safe space and a source of joy for so many of those boys at that school. That's the reality. And so by me leaving, I'm not there every single day. I'm not there to help them navigate. I'm not there to protect them in those moments that they needed protected, or wanted me to be there to watch them grow into the young men that they will ultimately be, into the grown men that they will evolve into. It does have an impact because students need consistency. We don't have legacy teachers anymore. We got 3 years and we out. Teachers aren't getting paid enough. The COVID impacted world, if you look at the people who have to still go back to brick and mortars, these are the industries that are struggling now. We don't have enough doctors. We don't have enough teachers. I don't care about police, but they also have to go back into the brick and mortar. Right. And everybody is struggling right now and trying to find ways to get people back into these spaces. Culture hasn't updated with that, which means kids at the end of the day are gonna be screwed because kids are still the victims in this situation, right? They still don't have that consistency, which makes kids feel like nobody's invested in them anymore. Why are y'all not staying? It quite literally is that, well, why don't you want me? That's that Will Smith moment right there. That's what kids are experiencing more and more. And so even a day where I got a little bit more dressed up than usual, the student said, "Are you leaving already? Are you preparing to leave us?" Because they are stuck with so much inconsistency in their classrooms, because teachers are burning out, right? It's not a sustainable space for us anymore. We're not the generation who wants to stay in a job that doesn't like really focus on our mental health or put structural infrastructure in to ensure like our mental health is taken care of. That's on the lift of the teacher as individuals, but the actual profession is emotionally draining. It's physically taxing. And we're a generation of we advocate for mental health a lot more. We question systems a lot more. Well, why is it this way? But in our questioning, the unintended consequences are the kids. And so I do think that's why there feels like a loss with students today. There feels like students just aren't as invested in education because educators are not invested in. It's not the kids, it's the institutions that are most reasons that teachers are leaving.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I want to tighten the scope a bit, right?
Yeah. Let's go.
Because young Black boys in educational institutions usually are the first criminalized, the first victimized, or first in line to be victimized, and the first ones to be institutionalized.
Correct.
Right. So I want to talk about how it is that we are seeing the trends of young Black men in education. Right. What is this looking like? Can you give us can you give us an updated scope of what it is that we are looking at post-COVID and all of these different avenues, elements, and things of that nature? Like, what is the vignette of the young Black man in education in 2024?
In 2024, and we're talking about the educator specifically?
From the educator's perspective onto the student.
Yeah. So right now it is us having to challenge so many of the systems that we're experiencing right now. And the issue is that we are sold the ideal of what education can be. And the ideal of education that they sell to especially young Black men, you're going to save these Black boys. This is what's going to save the world, and this, that, and the third. And we're using very radically idealistic language that, to me, I actually think makes us feel like we're less adequate at the job. And so oftentimes we're sold the ideal, but we're not actually sold the profession. We're not sold the labor that comes with this job. What kept me in education was being a good teacher, knowing I felt I had a strong ability to ensure that my kids were learning. The community comes after that, but then I'm like, good teachers are what save Black kids. Good teachers that's the liberatory aspect of it. But if you're getting a bunch of us in there, it's sexy to be a Black male educator. Any of us can step in and get a job. I'm gonna be fully honest. Like, there's nothing holding us back from going to education. That's normally most of anybody who has a 4-year degree. That's the first job we step into. And so when I think about the young Black man in the education space and looking at the students and looking at the educator's perspective, a lot of it is going into an environment that does not know how to handle us. Going into an environment where we have natural charisma. We are defaulted to the leaders in this space a lot of the time. But being defaulted to a leader also means that other Black people are intimidated, right? Women are intimidated. White men are intimidated. White women, who make up the majority of this profession, are intimidated. And then there's few and far in between going as you move up. That's the reality. And so in seeing that, we have to now navigate a space from an adult standpoint where, like, how do all of these people receive me as I'm moving? But then we're also seeing young Black boys experience education who feel dejected, who feel like they are not being cared for, who don't believe that they need to be nurtured. Because the other thing around having more Black men in education means that oftentimes we project onto young Black boys, what did we need growing up? Instead of thinking, what do you need now? So we either will coddle, and that was me early in my career when I was teaching 5th graders. I coddled a lot of kids because I was just like, dang, I wish somebody nurtured me a little bit more. I wish somebody was more in the emotional space for me a lot more. And there are other teachers who are just like, nah, you're going to learn the hard way. I'm going to fully go authoritarian. There we go. Authoritarian. I said words. I was actually trying how to use them. But I'm watching people pick one or two of the battles, and it takes time to find that sweet spot. But I also recognize, like, a lot of the time we're putting pressures on young Black boys and young Black men in education to have to be 10 times better, to be a lot more resilient. So in my mind, we tend to reinforce patriarchal ideals of being stoic, of being strong, of having to be disciplined in a very particular kind of way. That actually isn't conducive to the child of today. That's not conducive to the young Black boy. That's not conducive to the young Black man entering the education space. That's the reality. And so my goal has always been to shift what that means. How do we actually put proper SEL into these locations? Because you can't throw me into a classroom without therapy. You can't throw me into the classroom without self-awareness. You can't throw me into here because guess what? I either turn into the disciplinary, which where a lot of us as Black men get placed. So we tend to be deans in the education space, not the actual educators in the education space. And again, I've been privileged enough to work with nothing but niggas. Lucky. Now I'm in higher ed, so now it's a different boat and different politics. However, I think that has been the plight of the Black boy or Black man in education right now.
Mm-hmm. So going back to what you said about, and I actually like the way that you answered that question because it presented developmentally, right? Mm-hmm. The Black boy going into the Black youth, into the Black man, all within the span of education, and during very critical periods of time, we know that young Black men begin getting criminalized in the school system by the age of 3, right? We know that they are discriminated against very early, coming into, and I think we tend to focus on that point, but that middle part, right? Middle school, that socio-emotional learning aspect, right? That very real holistic perspective and lens on the developmental route of the education of a young Black boy, right? That feeling of dejection, that feeling of rejection, that feeling of nobody wants to deal with me, that feeling of nurture. How do you as an educator teach young Black men how to navigate those spaces, right? Because that's not necessarily something that you can give them a book to read about. I mean, there are books that are related to self-help, like, don't get me wrong, but in that, because I used to work with when I was an associate program director at over residential treatment facility, our guys were between the ages,
I said, smooth. I was just for a minute.
Yeah. Our guys were between the ages of 15 up to 25, right? So at the time I was 26. So I knew that I couldn't come in like a lot of people wanted me to come. Oh, I'm the big brother Black man, and I'm going like, nah. Also, if you fuck with me, I'm a daughter. They're like, nah. They're already used to that. These things are literally coming from they literally coming from the youth. Like they coming from JJ. They come from JJSC. They're used to being penalized. They're coming from environments where they're not sure as to whether or not somebody actually loves them or wants to deal with them. So me coming in as a young Black man in an administrative role and placing a lot of priority on face-to-face interaction, but also, as you said earlier, giving them the ability to be, right? So that dejection, those feelings of rejection can come to the forefront, right? The name of this episode is called Men Have Feelings Part 3. Again, hear my cry, right? How did you begin in the space of education dealing with those very real feelings?
Ooh, that's a really good question, right? Like I'll tell you, I'm a crybaby as is. Like but I'm particularly sensitive when it comes to kids. And so for me, I always found myself having to, one, make sure that space was created amongst our community to ensure like this is what this is, but then also just name my feelings out loud a lot of the time. And that seems different, right? Because you're dealing with a lot of students who are coming from environments where they are socialized to be as tough as possible. Some of the students are dealing with things that we did not have to deal with growing up with social media. And then they're just also hyper visible, right? And so for me, as I'm thinking about this question around like navigating emotions, it really is just letting them know like, yo, honestly, at the top of class, I'm having a tough day. Naming the thing out loud, because oftentimes what I realize is that lack of emotional vocabulary and us thinking that we always have to be the toughest person and we always have to show up and we always have to be the best versions of ourselves, X, Y, and Z. I'm going to do that because I'm in service of kids. But I'm also recognizing like I'm not a robot, not even close, like as a human being. And so oftentimes me presenting as my most authentic self, me presenting how I'm good. Me presenting like the feelings that I'm having right now actually starts to break down those barriers. And because of that breaking down those barriers, it's now like, how do you navigate anger? How do you navigate sadness? How do you navigate frustration? And that's difficult because for young boys and grown men, that's that permission piece that I was talking about. right? Because I am modeling what that looks like. I'm not saying I go and schedule like, all right, I'm gonna go cry in front of my kids today. This is gonna happen. I'm not. However, I was also the teacher who is trying to be as I tended to be a lot more chill in my environment, but I also did emotional check-ins, and so that would start at the beginning of class, and it was simple stuff. Everybody knows, like when I walked back to that when I did career day the other day, everybody goes, "How you living? How you live?" And that was my catchphrase, like when I was in there. But "how you living" was a very different experience for them because it's just not "how are you?" How you living? I'm living good, actually. I'm living bad. Well, why? And then you follow up and you ask. And so I know it's tough because they go in and they want us to be protectors. I know my 6'2", 240, my stature, it gives protector, right?
6'4", 275. Well, now I'm like 315. So it's like, yeah.
And so, but it was also like kind of a mind fuck for my kids too, right? Because they're also just like, this is very masculine, presenting human, but you're also giving me space. And so that presented a duality. And that's not something kids are used to. It's putting things into a box. That's not something grown people are used to because we're like, how duality? What's this thing? I need you to fit into how you are. Right. And so I learned very quickly as I wanted to get more Black boys, young Black men, and Black folks in general to like learn to navigate emotions and having to break that barrier and having to create community that way. It's like you're not alone. I see you every single day. It's good to be seen. So how do I make sure that I see you? How make sure that I affirm you and hold you accountable in those moments as well? And I always tell everybody, my idea of love is a balance of affirmation and accountability. If you can't find the love between those two things, then that's not love. One thing is either very consequential or very permissive. And so I can't love you and let you get away with nonsense, but I can't love you and never tell you the things you're doing really well or being able to know how to support you in other ways too. So I try to lead my classroom and lead with and model for young Black boys, young men in general, like this is what this can potentially look like. It may not look the same for everybody. I did not grow up the way some of my students grew up. However, here's at least a foundation of what could be. Yeah. So I hope I answered the question.
No, you did. You did. Right? And once again, you give answers like an educator, but that's fine. You're
guide you straight through it.
You know what I'm saying? Like I had my man's Dakota Tyler. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's the football player who got injured and then became an astrophysicist.
Casual.
Like, you feel me? Cold brother. I was like, yo, right. I got to get you on the jump. But he answered questions like a sports bull. I was like, yeah, makes sense, right? Yeah. But I want to go back to the duality, right? And the reality of giving space. You said that you were a crybaby, right? And I find that to be very funny. It is almost diametrically opposite to how it is that we perceive Black men in leadership in protector-esque roles, right? Correct. I be having to get on women folk about this too. I'm like, yo, your perception or your contextualization of masculinity isn't ideal. It is not the reality. You not allowing your partner, your son, your whoever to exist within this reality harms them. Correct. Them coming back to you and pointing fingers or snapping or doing X, Y, and Z, you cannot absolve yourself of this simply because your perception of a man is supposed to be endlessly stoic. That's foolish. You impact him just as much as he impacts you, right? So this duality and this holding space and this level of vulnerability that allows one to cry, right? I want you to tell me a little bit more about that. How did you come to this level of comfortability, and how did you create or build the space for other young Black men to have that same access?
Child, back in when was I 14? Was that 2010, 2011? It had to be my sophomore year of high school. It was me, Raul, and Chris. Those are some of my best friends as kids growing up. And I remember we used to sit on the porch, and it's like my comfort drink. So I said, "Oh, this is real hood rat." But we had hurricanes, so we had a 40, peach or apple, E&J, and then we would sit on the porch at night, one of our porches, and just talk about the things that made us nervous, about the things that scared us, about the things that we were super excited about. 3 different walks of life, right? Puerto Rican, Mexican, Black kid, trying to get through the hood and make sense of everything. But I didn't know that was not normal for so many people, right? That was a space that was for us to just figure out what life is and figure out how this thing is going to work. And so that's where I would say, like, I think my model had started. And then when I got to college, it really became finding that group of Black men specifically that I needed. So I got Miles, I got Rob, I got Langston, our boy Al's in that mix too. And so I had realized, like, oh, there's even a different level of impact because we all have a very particular shared identity. Mm-hmm. And so that was the moment where I was able to and it was specifically Rob I cried in front of the most, of having those moments and realizing, like, oh, this is the safety that I didn't realize I needed, but never got to have in that kind of way. If I was crying before as a kid, it was out of frustration. It had to be extreme forms of grief. It had to just be the most bottled up thing. Like that's not fair to anybody, right? I don't think that crying only needs to happen in the worst parts of time. I actually do think that those moments of relief and how your body just needs to, like, let go of some things. Mine comes in the form of tears. My little brother, he had to play football. The other one, like, they had their moments of, like, how they would, like, relieve their stuff, right? But for me, it was definitely having to get used to just being like, oh, I'm experiencing tears of joy right now, right? I'm experiencing tears that are fearful right now. I've seen my older brother cry, but when he cried as I left for college for the first time, because I'm the first out of my family to go, I was like, oh, I'm nervous around what this means. Is he going to be okay? All of that. And so I had realized there are different modes of what crying could look like. And so as I experienced that more and more, I talk about those moments that I've cried being excited, that I've cried being scared, that I'm crying watching season 1, episode 18 of This Is Us, where William dies. Okay. That is a death that will scar me for life. Okay. And so I tell everybody, like, TV shows, I get attached to characters because I'm like, dang, this is what I'm feeling, right? And so those are moments when I realize theater makes me cry, and compelling stories make me cry. Books make me cry. Like, these are all things that have had an impact on me. And so I had realized, like, I'm super empathetic, but I also realize these are moments where I'm just like, these are very natural human emotions. Like, I can't explain why I'm crying all the time. It just is happening. And then it's funny because I just was asked a question the other day. They were like, so you be scheduling your cries? I said, I know when my body needs to cry. Like, my eyes will water throughout the day. So I might not cry at work all the time. However, I am going to cry. And so my student, he was like, interesting. Like, Mr. Marquise, like, I didn't have insight to that was a thing. And so for me, what I had realized was letting kids know, letting young Black boys know when I experienced tears of joy, when I experienced tears of grief, fear, being proud of myself, like, that to me has been important. And I think it was funny. I think it was at Pod Nation where everybody's like, you cried tears of joy? I said, yes, I'm proud of myself, bro. Like, what are you talking about?
Niggas was like, what? It was like, you cried because you was happy? You was like, yeah, that's a thing. Niggas was in shock and awe.
I was like, oh my God, niggas is crying for joy? What? And so I had realized that, but I noticed so many people in my life had cried when the most extreme forms, where they felt like that was the only time that was permissible for them to cry, is what I would say. So it had to be after a fight, or it had to be death happened in order for them to have permission to cry. But in reality, I'm like, you're either crying when you're by yourself or you don't know how to cry in community with others. And I cry in community. I cry by myself. Like, it's coming one way or not. And I just got to figure out how I need to be nurtured in those moments.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think that I think that Black men spend so much time being taught how to be immobile or how to be rigid that we do not allow ourselves the opportunity or the space to be moved.
Yeah.
Right. And
That's
for something to be moving.
mm-hmm.
Right. And in a lot of ways, I think that's a parallel analysis or parallel analogy to the depth to which some of our emotions get stuck.
Oof. Yes.
You know what I'm saying? Or the way in which we tend to dig our heels in when it comes down to, digging into that space. It is the underneath the weight of masculinity. It is a young boy who genuinely just wants to be seen, felt, heard, understood, but believes that masculinity is equivalent to rigidity, that masculinity is equivalent to harm, pain.
Right.
I say it all the time. There are a number of men and women who believe that masculinity is the extent or the ability that you will allow yourself to be abused without saying anything.
Oof. Ooh. Yeah, yo. And it's so sad because everybody's so indoctrinated with that. Like even growing up, my sister's the oldest. My mom had 4 boys and a girl. Like and so many of us just express ourselves in so many different ways. And I think that's so interesting because even like my older brother, he talks around like he feels like he's most productive and masculine when he would never do a job like mine. Like teaching would never be the thing. But he's like, a factory job makes me feel productive. Moving something, lifting things makes me feel productive. Building things makes me feel more masculine. And if to me, I'm just like, I ain't lifting. I was a theater kid who told people what to do. I was a director. I was an actor. I was not the production major. It's also funny because I always tell people like my ability to empathize with other people actually comes from my background in theater. Like in theater, you literally have to step into another person's shoes, understand why they are flawed, and try to humanize their flaws to the best of your ability. What was their backstory? Who are they? How do they move? Why do they move with their head up? Why do they move by their waist? How do they guide with their heart? Do they walk like this? Like, right? How do they move, right? And why? So you create the backstory. You have to empathize, because if you can't create a compelling character on stage, that means you haven't humanized your character or got to know your character enough, despite if they are the villain or not. Which is why I love a good anti-hero, because you can understand like, why are you like this? So I would say like my last and final answer is like theater taught me to be a lot more empathetic and a lot more curious around the displays of humanity, specifically from men. Yeah.
Brother Marquise, I think that you just touched on a fantastic point, and I'm going to make this point in closing because we got to go. I got to go with this.
We'll circle back.
You and that's the Black men. You feel what I'm saying? I think that in a lot of different ways, Black men developmentally and in community have to give each other permission to be human. Right? And we have to do the work to not only humanize one another, but protect those spaces of humanization and humanity for Black men, created by Black men. And I think going back to what Malcolm X said about the homegrown education, I firmly believe that there is nobody else other than Black men who can save Black men than Black men, because we know the things that we need in order to feel safe. Because the root word to saved is safe. And if we do not communicate what safety looks like, or we do not allow ourselves once again to be moved to a point of vulnerability where we can say, yo, this is what I'm feeling, this is what I'm receiving, this is what I need, and this is what it is that I need from you, which is a type of education, right? I do not believe that we as Black men will make the leaps and the bounds that we need necessary in order to develop ourselves in community in the way that will benefit the community overall. Secondarily, but primarily, it will benefit us and our children, right? But Brother Marquise, tell the folks where you at, man. Tell the folks where you at.
Yes, sir. You can always find me across any social media site as long as TikTok's here. Marquise Davon, MarquisDavon. But you will find me. I'm a man of the Twitter streets. You always see me. Good morning to niggas and niggas only. You already know what the vibes are. Please make sure you do that. If not, you can listen to me at Keepin It a Bean podcast. And that's across all DSPs, or you can watch this lovely face, okay? Interview some folks right on YouTube. So you can go to Keepin It a Bean or Marquise Davon Productions as well. So that's where you'll find me. Please follow me, and we out here.
Most definitely. I appreciate you, Brother Marquise. And as always, good people, great people, guys, people, peace, love, soul, and butter rolls. I'll see y'all next time. Brother Marquise, thank you for having me.
All right, good, bro. Thank you for having me.
Peace.